The CEO was ready to sign bankruptcy, until a 5-year-old girl said, "Sir, you missed this number." Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. The air was thick with tension as CEO Richard Moore sat behind his mahogany desk, his hands shaking slightly as he stared at the balance sheet in front of him. The numbers didn't add up, and his mind kept racing through the inevitable conclusion: bankruptcy. For weeks, he had tried everything to turn his company around, but it felt like every attempt only made things worse. His once thriving tech company, Moore Technologies, was on the verge of collapse, and Richard knew the end was near. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed louder than usual, echoing the pressure building up in his chest. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples, exhaustion creeping in from all sides. He glanced at his phone, checking the time. It was nearly 5 in the afternoon. Just a few more minutes, and he would sign the papers that would mark the end of an era, the end of everything he had worked for. He sighed heavily. "It's over," he muttered to himself. As Richard stared at the paperwork in front of him, a small voice broke through the oppressive silence. "Excuse me, sir?" Richard looked up, startled. Standing in the doorway was a little girl, no more than 5 years old, her wide brown eyes looking at him with an innocent curiosity. She was the daughter of one of the employees, and Richard had seen her around the office from time to time, but he hadn't expected her to be in his office today. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice tight with frustration. The little girl stepped inside, holding a piece of paper in her tiny hands. "I was looking at your numbers, and I think you missed one," she said matter-of-factly, walking up to his desk. Richard blinked in surprise. "What do you mean, missed one?" he asked, trying to suppress a smile. The idea of a little girl pointing out his mistakes seemed absurd, but the girl didn't smile back. She just pointed to a specific line on the balance sheet. "Right here," she said, her tiny finger tracing a number on the page. "You missed this one. It's supposed to be a positive number, not a negative one." Richard stared at the paper, his heart suddenly pounding in his chest. His mind raced as he quickly scanned the number she had pointed to. Could it be? He had overlooked something so simple, so obvious. He leaned forward, squinting at the numbers, his hands shaking slightly. The girl's eyes were still fixed on him, waiting patiently, her little face serious. Richard couldn't believe it. She was right. The numbers were wrong, and correcting that mistake would make all the difference. He quickly adjusted the figures, and the impact was immediate. The red ink that had covered the page turned to black. For the first time in weeks, Richard felt a glimmer of hope. He looked at the girl in awe, realizing that in just a few seconds, she had done what no one else had been able to do. He had been ready to give up, to sign away his company's future, but this little girl had saved him. "How did you know?" Richard asked, his voice filled with wonder. The girl shrugged, her face breaking into a shy smile. "I don't know," she said innocently. "I just thought you missed it." Richard sat back in his chair, stunned by the turn of events. In that moment, it wasn't just the financial future of his company that had been saved. Something else had been awakened in him. A realization that sometimes the answers to our biggest problems come from the most unexpected places. He smiled down at the little girl. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. The girl nodded, turning to leave the room. As she reached the door, she paused and looked back at him. "You're welcome, sir. You just needed a little help," she said before walking out. Richard sat there for a moment, staring at the paper on his desk. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. Richard sat back in his chair, his mind still racing from the moment the little girl had pointed out the mistake. He had just avoided signing away the future of Moore Technologies, and for the first time in days, he felt a spark of hope. The numbers in front of him now made sense, and he could see the path forward more clearly than ever before. As the reality of what had just happened settled in, Richard couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude towards the little girl. He had been ready to give up, to throw in the towel, but somehow, in her innocent way, she had saved everything. He leaned forward again, his fingers dancing across the keyboard as he made the final adjustments to the balance sheet. He had no idea how much of a difference those small changes would make. But for the first time, it seemed like there was a way out of this mess. Richard looked up from his screen and glanced around his office. The walls, once suffocating, now felt like a place of possibility. His eyes settled on the framed photos of his family on the desk. His wife, Emily, and their 2 kids were always his source of motivation, even when things were tough. But lately, the pressures of running a company had made him distant, disconnected. He had been so consumed by work that he had lost sight of what truly mattered. As he sat there, contemplating everything, the door to his office opened, and in walked his assistant, Sarah. She looked at him curiously. "Are you okay, Richard? You look different," she said softly. Richard smiled, a genuine smile, the first one in a long time. "I think I just had a wake-up call," he replied. "It's amazing how the smallest things can change your entire perspective." Sarah raised an eyebrow but didn't press the issue. She had been with him long enough to know when to push and when to back off. "Well, I'm glad to see you in better spirits. I've got some good news. The bank just approved your loan extension. With the adjustments, we should be able to avoid bankruptcy." Richard nodded, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. "That's fantastic news, Sarah. Thank you for everything. But I think I owe it all to a little girl." Sarah chuckled. "A little girl?" Richard laughed. "Yeah, a 5-year-old. She came into my office earlier, pointed out a mistake in the numbers, and saved the company." Sarah looked at him, puzzled, but then the smile returned to Richard's face. "I guess sometimes it takes a child's innocence to see what grown-ups miss." Just as he said that, his phone buzzed on the desk. He picked it up, glancing at the message. It was from his wife, Emily. "I'm so proud of you today. Can't wait to celebrate tonight." Richard's heart warmed. He realized then that he had been so focused on the company's survival that he had forgotten about the people who really mattered, the ones who believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. His mind wandered back to the little girl, and a part of him felt a deep sense of humility. How many times had he overlooked the little things in life, focused only on the big picture? He realized that sometimes it's the smallest gestures that have the most significant impact. As the day went on, Richard made a promise to himself. He would not let this near collapse define him. He would reconnect with his family, with the people who mattered most. And he would never again let the pressures of work cloud his judgment or take away his ability to appreciate the small moments. Richard's phone buzzed again, and he looked down. This time, it was an email from his CFO. The subject line read, "We're turning things around." Richard opened the email and began to read the details of the recovery plan. It was going to be a long road, but it was a road he was now willing to travel with a renewed sense of purpose. That evening, Richard walked into his home, his shoulders a little lighter than they had been in weeks. He saw Emily and the kids in the living room, laughing and playing. It felt like the world had finally slowed down enough for him to appreciate it. As he sat down with them, the warmth of family surrounded him. He looked over at Emily, who smiled at him with that knowing look. He realized that the real wealth in his life wasn't in the success of his business, but in the love and support of those who mattered most. Richard smiled to himself. Maybe, just maybe, that little girl had given him more than just a chance to save his company. She had reminded him of what truly mattered in life. The following morning, Richard woke up feeling more alive than he had in weeks. The weight of the previous days had lifted, replaced by a sense of clarity he hadn't realized he was missing. As he sipped his coffee, his phone buzzed. It was another email from his CFO, confirming that the financial restructuring was moving forward faster than expected. The loan extension had been finalized, and the company was now in a much stronger position. Richard couldn't believe how quickly things had turned around. The girl's simple correction had started a chain of events that not only saved his company, but also reminded him of the importance of perspective. He felt a renewed sense of gratitude. Richard's thoughts were interrupted when Emily walked into the kitchen, her eyes bright with energy. "Good morning," she said with a warm smile. Richard turned to her, meeting her gaze. "Good morning. I feel like a weight has been lifted," he replied, his voice steady with newfound confidence. Emily raised an eyebrow. "That's great to hear. I'm proud of you, Richard. I know it hasn't been easy." Richard's heart swelled with warmth. He had been so wrapped up in the company's struggles that he had forgotten what it meant to truly be present. "It hasn't, but things are looking up now," he said, his smile genuine. "It's amazing how a little shift in perspective can change everything." Emily set down her coffee and walked over to him. You've been under a lot of pressure lately. It's good to see you coming back to yourself. Richard nodded, taking her hand in his. I think I've been focusing on the wrong things. I've been so caught up in saving the company that I almost forgot about what really matters. You, the kids, our life together. Emily squeezed his hand, her eyes softening. I know, but you've always been driven. That's part of who you are. But it's also important to remember the people who are rooting for you, the ones who care about you the most. Richard nodded, taking a deep breath. You're right, and I want to make sure I never lose sight of that again. Later that day, Richard made a phone call to the little girl's father, the employee whose daughter had helped him turn things around. He wanted to thank her properly. When the father answered, Richard introduced himself, his voice warm and sincere. Hi, this is Richard Moore from Moore Technologies. I wanted to personally thank your daughter for helping me out yesterday. There was a pause on the other end of the line before the father replied. Oh, you're welcome. She's a bright one, that's for sure. Richard chuckled, feeling a sense of humility. She certainly is. She pointed out a mistake in my numbers that no one else had caught. I truly believe she's saved the company. The father laughed softly. She has a way of seeing things others don't. She's always been that way. Richard smiled. Well, I'm grateful for her. If it weren't for her, I might have made the worst decision of my life. The conversation ended with the father expressing his thanks for Richard's kind words, and Richard hung up feeling a deep sense of appreciation. As the day went on, Richard found himself thinking more about what the little girl had done. It wasn't just the numbers that had saved him. It was her innocent perspective, her ability to see things from a place of honesty and clarity. Richard realized that sometimes the answers we need aren't buried in complex spreadsheets or boardroom meetings. They're in the simple, everyday moments, often seen through the eyes of someone who hasn't yet been jaded by the weight of the world. That evening, as Richard sat down with his family for dinner, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. His company was back on track, but more importantly, he was back with the people who truly mattered. As Emily served dinner, he looked at their children, their laughter filling the room. It was in these moments, Richard realized, that life's true value lay. The company could come and go, but his family, their support, their love, that was what he needed to cherish. As he sat there, watching them, Richard made a promise to himself. He would never again let the pressures of work steal these precious moments. He had been given a second chance, and he would make sure it wasn't wasted. The story wasn't just about saving his company. It was about rediscovering what truly mattered, and that was something he would never forget. The following weeks brought a sense of stability to Richard Moore's life. The company was on its way to recovery, and the weight of imminent bankruptcy had lifted from his shoulders. But Richard knew that the real change wasn't just in the company's financials, it was in him. He had been so consumed by his business that he had forgotten what truly mattered. That realization, sparked by a 5-year-old's innocent observation, had led him to reconnect with his family, to cherish the simple moments that had once been so easy to overlook. As the days passed, Richard made an effort to be more present. He spent weekends with Emily and the kids, taking them to the park, enjoying quiet dinners, and even helping with the kids' school projects. He found joy in the little things, the laughter of his children, the warmth of Emily's smile, and the peaceful moments they shared. One Saturday afternoon, Richard sat in the living room, his laptop open in front of him. Emily was nearby, flipping through a magazine. The kids were playing in the yard. For the first time in a long while, Richard felt at ease. No urgent phone calls, no meetings to rush off to, just the sound of his family's laughter filling the room. Emily glanced up from her magazine, noticing the peaceful expression on Richard's face. You look relaxed, she said, her voice light. Richard smiled, leaning back in his chair. I am. It's been a long time since I've had a moment like this. Emily put down the magazine and walked over to him, sitting on the arm of his chair. I've noticed a change in you, Richard. You seem more present, more connected. Richard nodded, a slight chuckle escaping his lips. I guess I've been given a second chance. It's not just the company that needed saving. I did too. Emily reached over and squeezed his hand. I'm proud of you, Richard. I know how hard you've worked and how much pressure you've been under, but I'm glad you're finding balance. Richard looked up at her, his eyes softening. I'm realizing that work isn't everything. It's important, but it's not everything. What matters most is here. He motioned to the kids outside, laughing and playing in the yard. That's what I've been missing. Just as they were sharing this quiet moment, Richard's phone buzzed. It was an email from his CFO. Richard's heart skipped a beat as he quickly opened it, his eyes scanning the subject line, financial. Recovery complete. Next steps. He clicked on the email, reading through the details. The recovery plan had worked. Not only had the company avoided bankruptcy, but it was now poised for growth. The future was looking bright, but Richard didn't feel the rush of relief he had once expected. Instead, he felt a sense of calm. The pressure of running the company no longer consumed him. He had a new perspective on life, and he wasn't about to lose it. Emily noticed the shift in his demeanor. "What's wrong?" she asked, concern in her voice. Richard looked at her, a smile tugging at his lips. "Nothing's wrong. It's just, I'm finally where I need to be. With you. With the kids." Emily smiled back, her heart swelling. "I'm glad to hear that. You've been working so hard for so long. You deserve this." Richard took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past few months lift from his shoulders. "I've been so focused on work that I forgot to focus on what really matters. But not anymore. From now on, I'm putting family first." That evening, as they sat down for dinner together, Richard looked at Emily and the kids with a sense of contentment. He realized that, in a way, it had taken losing everything he thought mattered to find what truly did. As the kids chattered happily about their day, Richard sat back, grateful for the lesson he had learned. The work would always be there, but the moments with his family, those were the ones that mattered most. As the weeks passed, Richard found himself settling into a rhythm he had never experienced before. The pressures of running more technologies no longer felt like a crushing weight, but rather a challenge he was ready to face with clarity and renewed purpose. He still worked hard, but now he balanced it with the joy of being fully present with his family. He no longer felt the need to prove anything. His success, once tied to the company's survival, was now defined by the love and connection he had with those around him. One evening, as Richard and Emily sat together on the porch watching the kids play in the yard, Emily turned to him with a thoughtful look on her face. "I've noticed a change in you," she said, her voice soft. Richard smiled and looked at her, his gaze steady. "I've noticed it too. It's like a weight has been lifted." Emily nodded, sensing the depth of what he meant. "You've always been driven, Richard, but it's like you're finally learning to enjoy the journey, not just focus on the destination." Richard chuckled softly. "I think I've finally learned that the destination isn't the end. It's the people along the way that make it worthwhile." The kids ran past them, laughing, their energy infectious. Richard leaned back in his chair, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. He realized how much time he had spent chasing after success, constantly striving for the next big achievement, only to overlook the simple moments that had been the true measure of happiness all along. As the evening wore on, Richard found himself reflecting on his relationship with his children. He had always been there for them, but in the past, he had been distracted, caught up in the hustle and bustle of his work. Now, he made a conscious effort to be involved in their lives, to listen to their stories, and to share in their excitement. One weekend, Richard decided to take his daughter, Lily, to her favorite art gallery. It was a small place, tucked away in a quiet part of town, but it was one of Lily's favorite places to visit. She had always been drawn to the colorful paintings, the vibrant landscapes, and the way art made her feel. Richard had never been particularly interested in art, but he wanted to share this experience with her, to show her that he was truly there for her. As they walked through the gallery, Lily's eyes lit up with excitement as she pointed out her favorite pieces. Richard watched her with a sense of admiration, amazed at how passionate she was about something so simple. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to let go of the constant pressure to achieve and simply be present in the moment. After their visit to the gallery, they stopped for ice cream. As they sat together on a bench, Richard looked at Lily, her face smeared with chocolate, and felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what mattered. Not the boardroom meetings, not the deadlines, but these moments with his family. Later that evening, Richard sat down at his desk, ready to tackle the work that still awaited him. But as he glanced at the family photo on his desk, he felt a sense of gratitude he had never experienced before. The work would always be there, but he had learned something far more valuable. That true fulfillment came from the love and support of those around him. The next day, Richard made a phone call to the same little girl whose innocent words had set this entire journey in motion. Her father answered, and Richard could hear the pride in his voice. "I just wanted to thank you again," Richard said. "Your daughter saved my company, and in doing so, she helped me save myself." The father chuckled softly. "She's a special one, that's for sure. Always thinking outside the box." Richard smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "I've learned more from her than I ever could have imagined. She's taught me that sometimes it's the smallest gestures that can make the biggest difference." As the conversation ended, Richard felt at peace. His company was stable again, but it was the personal growth he had experienced that mattered most. He had found a new sense of purpose, one rooted in his relationships and the love of his family. And he knew, deep down, that this was the real success he had been searching for all along. As the months went by, Richard continued to embrace his new way of life. The business was thriving, but Richard's focus had shifted. He no longer felt consumed by the relentless pursuit of success. Instead, he found fulfillment in the simple moments with his family, and his work now served to enhance his life rather than define it. One crisp fall afternoon, Richard decided to take Emily on a surprise trip to a quiet cabin in the mountains, a place they had visited early in their relationship. It had been years since they had spent a weekend alone, just the two of them, without the constant interruptions of work. Emily was thrilled when Richard told her about the getaway. "I didn't think you remembered this place," she said with a smile as they drove through the winding roads that led to the cabin. Richard chuckled. "I remember everything," he said, glancing at her with affection. As they arrived at the cabin, Richard could feel the weight of the world lift from his shoulders. The air was fresh and crisp, and the sounds of nature were calming. The next few days passed in a blur of peaceful moments. They spent hours by the fireplace, talking, laughing, and reconnecting in a way they hadn't in years. They took long walks through the woods, enjoying the quiet of the mountains and the company of each other. It was exactly what they both needed. On the final evening of their trip, as the sun set behind the mountains, Richard and Emily stood on the porch, holding hands. Richard turned to Emily, his voice soft. "I've been thinking a lot about how much I've missed over the years, how much I took for granted. I've been so focused on work that I forgot what really mattered." Emily squeezed his hand. "You're not the only one," she said gently. "We both got caught up in everything." Richard nodded, looking out over the mountains. "I don't want to make that mistake again. I want to be present with you, with the kids. I want to build something real, not just a business." Emily smiled at him, her heart full. "I'm glad to hear you say that." As they sat down for dinner that night, Richard looked at Emily and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He had been given a second chance, not just with his company, but with his family. He realized that life was about balance, about making time for the things that truly mattered. As they talked late into the night, Richard felt a sense of peace he had never experienced before. The following week, Richard made a decision. He called a meeting with his executive team and shared his new vision for the company. "We're going to focus on sustainability and long-term growth," he told them. "But we're also going to focus on people, the people who work for us, the families we serve, and the communities we're a part of." His team listened intently as he laid out his plans for the future. Richard was no longer just a CEO. He was a leader who understood the importance of balance, of leading with purpose and integrity. As he finished the meeting, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He wasn't just leading a successful company. He was leading a company with a purpose. And as he walked out of the conference room, he thought about the little girl who had changed his life. He had been so focused on numbers and deadlines, but it was her innocence and honesty that had given him the clarity he needed. Richard knew that the journey ahead would not always be easy, but with his family by his side and a renewed sense of purpose, he was ready to face whatever came next. The future was no longer about saving his company. It was about building a legacy, one that would be defined not by profits, but by the love, support, and connection he had with those around him. And for the first time in a long while, Richard felt truly at peace, knowing that he had found the balance he had been searching for all along. Richard had settled into this new chapter of his life with a sense of peace, but the reality of running more technologies was never far from his mind. The changes he had made, shifting his focus from pure success to balance, had been incredibly rewarding, but there were still challenges ahead. The company was on a better path, and now Richard found himself facing another significant decision: the future of more technologies. He sat in his office one late afternoon, staring out at the city below, reflecting on how far he had come. The constant pressure to perform, to outdo competitors, was no longer his driving force. He realized that while financial success was important, it couldn't be the only measure of his worth. He wanted to build something that would last, something that his children and future generations could be proud of. The door to his office creaked open, and Emily walked in, holding a folder in her hand. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. Richard turned to her and smiled. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking." She set the folder down on his desk and sat across from him. "About what?" Richard hesitated for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I'm thinking about the company's future. What's next for us?" Emily nodded, her eyes focused on him. "It's been a crazy journey, hasn't it?" she said, her voice calm but understanding. Richard chuckled. "It has. And now, I'm realizing that it's not just about what we accomplish here. It's about how we build a legacy, one that's grounded in values, in doing things the right way." Emily leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. "And how? Do you plan to do that?" Richard's eyes lit up with a new sense of purpose. "I want to create a culture here where people feel supported, where they can thrive, not just professionally but personally. I want to help our employees grow, just like I've grown." Emily smiled. "I think that's a great idea. It's about creating something more than just a business. It's about making a difference." Richard nodded. "Exactly. I've been so focused on the numbers and the deadlines, I forgot about the people who make this company run. I want to make sure they have everything they need to succeed, too." As they sat together, talking about the vision for the company's future, Richard felt the weight of his past decisions slowly lifting. He had spent years feeling like he needed to prove something, but now he realized that the only thing worth proving was that he could be a good leader, a good husband, and a good father. As the days passed, Richard began implementing his new vision for more technologies. He worked with his leadership team to create mentorship programs, flexible working conditions, and professional development opportunities. It wasn't just about financial success anymore. It was about fostering an environment where people felt valued, where they could grow and contribute to something bigger than themselves. There were challenges along the way, of course. Not everyone agreed with the changes, and some questioned whether the company could still compete in such a competitive market. But Richard knew that the true test of leadership wasn't about making the most money or becoming the biggest player. It was about staying true to your values, even when it was hard. As the company adjusted to this new culture, Richard saw a shift in the people around him. Employees seemed more motivated, more engaged. They were excited to be a part of something that was about more than just profits. The results were clear. More Technologies was thriving, not just financially, but in terms of company morale and employee satisfaction. Richard's decision to focus on people had paid off. It wasn't just the company that had changed, Richard had changed, too. He was no longer the CEO driven solely by ambition and the need for recognition. He was a leader who understood the importance of balance, of putting people first. As he sat in his office one evening, looking out at the skyline, Richard felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had built something real, something that would last, a company that valued its people and made a positive impact on the world. And, most importantly, he had rediscovered what truly mattered in his life: love, family, and a sense of purpose. With a contented smile, Richard closed his laptop and stood up from his desk. He knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but he was ready to face them. This was only the beginning of a new chapter, one where success was measured not by numbers, but by the difference they made in the lives of others. As Richard continued to nurture the company's new culture, he realized that the changes he had implemented weren't just affecting More Technologies. They were changing him, too. His leadership style had evolved, becoming more about mentorship and support than simply achieving targets. The growth of his employees, the way they were thriving in this new environment, brought him a sense of fulfillment that he had never experienced before. Richard's focus on people, on creating a culture where employees felt valued and heard, was paying off in ways he hadn't anticipated. He found that when people were treated well and empowered, they didn't just work harder, they worked smarter. The morale in the office was higher than it had ever been, and productivity was soaring. But it wasn't just about work. Richard had also become more involved with his family. He now made a conscious effort to be there for the important moments in his children's lives. It was during one of these moments, at Lily's school play, that he truly understood the impact of his choices. As the lights dimmed in the small auditorium, Richard sat next to Emily, his heart swelling with pride. Lily stood on stage, beaming, as she delivered her lines flawlessly. Richard's eyes never left her. The joy on her face, the confidence in her voice. It was everything he had hoped for when he decided to be more present. Emily looked over at him and smiled. "You're really here," she said softly. Richard nodded, a deep sense of gratitude in his chest. "I'm really here," he whispered back. After the play, as they drove home, Richard reflected on how much he had changed. A few months ago, he would have been too busy with work to even attend. He had missed so much of his children's lives, but now he was making up for it every day. It was moments like these that reminded him why he had chosen to change. The next morning, Richard woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. His family had become his anchor, and his work was no longer the defining force in his life. He had built something sustainable, something that would outlast him, and he was proud of what more technologies had become. But more than that, he was proud of the man he had become. As he sat down at his desk that morning, ready to tackle the day's challenges, Richard's phone buzzed. It was a message from his CFO. "We've hit a new milestone. The company has never been in a better financial position." Richard smiled to himself. He had come a long way from the man who had almost signed away his company just months earlier. But this time, it wasn't the numbers that mattered. It was the people, the ones who had helped him build this success, the ones who had supported him through thick and thin. That afternoon, Richard walked through the office, stopping to speak with several employees. He checked in on their progress, offered encouragement, and made sure they knew they were appreciated. The old Richard, the one focused solely on results, would have never done this. But now, he knew that leadership wasn't just about calling the shots. It was about building relationships, lifting people up, and empowering them to succeed. As he walked out of the office that evening, Richard realized that he had come full circle. The business was thriving, but it was the people, the relationships he had built, the connections he had made, that had truly transformed his life. He had learned that success was not just about achieving goals or making money. It was about the impact you had on others, the legacy you left behind. And as Richard closed the door to his office for the night, he felt content. He was no longer defined by his role as CEO, but by the love and respect of the people around him. He had found balance, and with it, he had found true happiness. As Richard sat in the quiet of his office, the sunset casting a warm glow through the windows, he reflected on how far he had come. The journey from the brink of bankruptcy to rebuilding more technologies, both in business and in its culture, had been more than just a professional success. It had been a personal transformation. He had learned, in ways he never could have anticipated, that success was not solely defined by profits or titles. It was about the people you surrounded yourself with, the relationships you nurtured, and the balance you struck between work and life. That evening, after another productive day, Richard closed his laptop and stood up from his desk. He had spent years immersed in the world of business, chasing goals, deadlines, and financial targets. But now, his focus was on building something that would leave a lasting impact on his family and his employees. He had rediscovered the value of connection, of being present for the moments that truly mattered. Richard's thoughts drifted to Emily and the kids. The changes in him had been felt by everyone around him. He was more involved, more attentive, and more committed to being the father and husband they needed. He had become a better leader not just at work, but in his home, and it was something he was incredibly proud of. That night, over a simple dinner with his family, Richard looked around the table and realized that the wealth he had once pursued was nothing compared to the richness of the life he now had. The laughter of his children, the quiet moments with Emily, and the love they shared were the true treasures of his life. As the kids finished their meal and ran off to play, Emily leaned over to Richard. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her eyes shining. Richard smiled, squeezing her hand. "I'm proud of us," he replied. "We've built something real, and it's just the beginning." It was a moment of clarity, a realization that he had found what he had been searching for all along. He had the company, the family, and the peace of mind that came from knowing that his work was no longer a source of stress and exhaustion. He had learned that it was never about the money or the accolades. It was about the impact you made on others, the way you made them feel, and the legacy you left behind. Over the following months, Richard's focus on balance continued to shape his decisions. more technologies flourished. But now the company's success was tied not just to the bottom line, but to the well-being of its employees. Richard was determined to create a place where people felt supported and valued, where they could thrive not just in their careers, but in their personal lives as well. It wasn't easy, and there were still challenges ahead, but Richard faced them with a sense of purpose and a renewed sense of determination. As the years passed, Richard's vision for more technologies became a reality. The company continued to grow, but more importantly, it became a place where people could find fulfillment and meaning in their work. Richard had built a culture of collaboration, trust, and respect, and it paid off in ways that went beyond financial success. And as Richard looked back on his journey, he realized that the most valuable lesson he had learned was that true success came not from what you built, but from who you became along the way. He had become the leader he had always hoped to be, but more importantly, he had become the man he had always wanted to be. With his family by his side and a company that reflected his values, Richard felt a deep sense of peace. He had found his balance, and he knew that this was just the beginning of a long and fulfilling journey, one that would continue to be defined by the love, support, and connections that truly mattered. Millionaire stories often reveal the unexpected twists and turns that define success. In this tale, Richard, a once overworked CEO, finds his life changed by a simple moment of kindness from a young girl. As his company teeters on the edge of bankruptcy, he is reminded that true wealth isn't just measured in profits, but in the love, support, and connections that truly matter. Through a series of challenges and realizations, Richard learns that success is not just about achieving goals, but about finding balance and purpose in life. This millionaire story takes a deep dive into personal transformation, showing how the most valuable lessons can come from the smallest, most unexpected places. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the journey to wealth and fulfillment involves more than just business. It's about the relationships and moments that shape who we are. As Richard begins to rebuild his company with a new perspective, he discovers that Millionaire stories are about much more than money. They are about legacy, family, and the people who help us grow. By shifting his focus from work to family, Richard finds peace and true success. His journey proves that millionaire stories are often more than about financial gain. They're about becoming the person you were always meant to be.